Did you know that you could stack health potions for a greater effect? What's going on, guys? My name is Tyicus. In this video, I wanted to go over some of the lesser known tips for Dark and Darker, like the one that I just mentioned about the health potions. Dark and Darker is still very much in development, and lots of mechanics in the game are not necessarily told to the players. Now, I mainly play a rogue class, however these tips are general enough that it will apply to any class. Some of these tips you may or may not have already known about. If you are new to Dark and Darker, make sure to stick around and you just might learn something new about the game. And if you are a veteran of the game, please make sure to share any tips you might have that I may have missed in the comments below so that we can all learn together. Alright, so without further ado, these are only 10 quick tips to get you started. There are many more tips, but I wanted to keep this video short and concise. So let's move on with the first tip. The first tip, like I mentioned in the beginning of the video, is stacking health potions. You are able to consume different qualities of health potions to effectively stack the recovering effect. You'll see a lot of high-level players use this technique for sustainability during fights. So consider bringing health potions of different qualities into your next raid. Moving on to tip number 2, default stats on gear. Each piece of equipment have their own default white stats. Take for example the riveted gloves versus the leather gloves. We can see that the riveted gloves offer a +1 to strength, whereas the leather gloves offer a +1 to agility. And if we look at the chest pieces here, the Regal Gambeson has a armor value of 50 with a move speed penalty of -15 and 10 magic resist. So on and so forth with the different chest pieces. And the same can be said with the boots. Lightfoot boots offer 10 movement speed versus 5 and 3 on the adventure boots and the laced shoes. Alright, so why is this important? Let's take my rogue for example. Let's say I want to focus on getting as much movement speed as possible. Well, it wouldn't make much sense to put on a Regal Gambeson and the laced shoes, since the Regal Gambeson has a -15 move speed penalty and the laced shoes are only a +3 to movement. Instead, I should focus on getting a set with the Lightfoot boots, leather gloves, the Marauder outfit or the doublet, and the loose trousers. Again, we're only looking at the default white stats here. Granted, yes, I am giving up armor rating and magical resistance, but those choices are the ones that you have to consider when building your character. While we are on the topic of movement, let's get into our next tip, and that would have to be sheathing your weapons. This one is pretty straightforward. If you didn't know yet, sheathing your weapon, which by default is keybound to X, will allow your character to move around much quicker. So if you are chasing or running away, make sure you sheath your weapon. Moving on to tip number 4, slowdowns you may not have known about. Again, on the same topic of movement, getting hit, swinging your weapon, and consuming potions all slow your character's movement speed significantly for a brief amount of time. So if you ever wondered why you just couldn't get away from that fighter or barbarian who landed an attack on you, this is the reason why. Also, when chasing down a fleeing opponent, make sure you're not swinging your weapon wildly, you are just slowing yourself down. The same thing applies when it comes to consuming potions. Make sure you are at a safe distance before chugging down that potion. I can't tell you how many times I've killed people trying to run away from me while drinking a potion. On to the next tip would have to be dual wielding combos. This tip mainly applies to classes that can dual wield weapons, fighters, barbarians, and rogues. Did you know that you could attack faster by comboing your primary and secondary attacks together? For example, in this clip, you can see that spamming your primary attack has its own set tempo. And the exact same thing when it comes to spamming your offhand strikes. However, in this example, if you swing your offhand and then immediately attack with your primary weapon, you can see that the attack comes out much faster. This example is of the arming sword and the short sword. Make sure to experiment with the weapon combinations of your choice. Moving on to tip number 6, that would have to be extending your swing arc. If you are familiar with games like Mordhau and Chivalry, this concept is quite easy for you to understand. However, if you are new to medieval combat games, what I'm talking about here is manipulating your camera during a swing animation to effectively extend the hitbox. For example, let's take a look at the arming sword. It has a nice diagonal swing going from the upper right to the lower left. Now, if I wanted to extend the cleaving range, I would simply swing and quickly snap my camera in the same direction. You can see that I hit the second dummy during this clip. This is a technique that you will see in a lot of high-level PvP. Not only does this allow you to cleave multiple targets, but it effectively extends the hitbox of your swing, making it easier to hit your opponent. Now, this concept only really applies to slashing weapons and not necessarily poking weapons, as those are precise strikes. So if you're having a hard time hitting moving targets, try practicing this technique. And while we're talking about hitting dummies, let's talk about hitboxes. In Dark and Darker, there are 3 different types of hitboxes, and they have different damage multipliers. We have head, torso, and limbs as separate hitboxes. The head, of course, takes the most damage at 150% damage. The torso takes 100% of damage, and the arms and legs only take 50% of the total damage. Obviously, you should be aiming for headshots as much as possible. However, if you notice something that is taking a lot more hits than usual to kill, consider where you are hitting your target. And again, while we are on the same topic about dealing damage and hitboxes, let's talk about sweet and sour spots on your weapons. Did you know that certain weapons in this game have sweet and sour spots? And no, I'm not talking about your favorite candy as a kid. I mean, there are certain parts of a weapon that will deal 100% of its damage and other parts that deal significantly less damage. For example, let's take a look at the bardiche. The sweet spot, or the most effective part of this weapon, would be at the top of the weapon, which would make sense since that is where the blade and the most force is generated on that weapon. However, anything below the sweet spot, say for example towards the handle of the weapon, is considered the sour spot. While it still does damage to your opponent, in this example, the bardiche will only do 60% of its total damage if you are hitting with the sour spot of the weapon. This is of course specific to the bardiche, which, by the way, these numbers are taken from the Spells and Guns wiki for Dark and Darker, which I will have a link in the description below if you're interested in checking out if your weapon has a sweet or sour spot. So if you haven't guessed it already, depending on your weapon, there is an importance on spacing during combat in order to be effective. For all of my rogue players out there, all of the weapons that we can use do not have sour spots, so you can space your opponent out or hug them to death all you want. Alright, so let's move on to tip number 9, and that would have to be head deep in treasure. This is more of a side tip. As a rogue main, there are so many times where I have killed many players who have had their head deep inside of treasure chests. Instead of standing directly in front of the treasure chest and looking down while you are looting the chest, I would suggest stepping to the side of the container, crouching and spinning the camera just enough so that you can still open the container, but more importantly, your back is against the wall and you can see anything that is approaching you. Again, this is just a small tip from a rogue main. And the last tip that I have for you guys is head movement. By now, you know that getting hit in the head deals the most damage to you. However, that does not stop you from making your head a difficult target to hit. This is a technique that you will see a lot of good players abuse during fights. Crouching, looking down, or even looking straight up at the ceiling will bend your character's model, making it very difficult for your enemies to hit your head. And while it may look silly from your opponent's point of view, it's a whole lot better than simply backwalking and taking a sword to the face, just like this guy. Alrighty guys, that's gonna be it for this video. If you enjoyed the video, make sure you guys hit that like button and subscribe to the channel. Again, if you have any tips that you would like to share, please post them down in the comments down below. Other than that, thank you guys for giving me your eyeballs, and I will see you guys in the next one. Peace.